A teenager mocked a 90-year-old Marine, but he had no idea that 10 Hell's Angels were watching nearby. What happened moments later was something no one could have imagined. The parking lot outside Jerry's diner was half empty when Harold Mitchell pulled his truck into a spot near the entrance. His hands, weathered and marked with age spots, gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. At 90 years old, every movement required deliberation. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, gathering his strength. The Marine Corps cap sat on the passenger seat beside him. Harold reached for it, placing it carefully on his head. The emblem still meant something to him, even if the world had moved on. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to The Ride for Justice. Harold opened the truck door and stepped down carefully. His left knee protested immediately. The doctors had warned him about the arthritis, but he refused to use a cane. Pride kept him upright, even when his body demanded otherwise. The November air bit at his face as he shuffled toward the diner entrance. His pace was slow, deliberate, each step a small victory against time. "Move it, old man." The voice came from behind him. Harold turned slowly, painfully. 3 teenagers stood near a black sedan, all wearing expensive sneakers and designer jackets. The one who had shouted couldn't have been more than 17. Gelled hair and a smirk that suggested he'd never faced consequences. "I'm moving as fast as I can," Harold said quietly. "Yeah, well, some of us have places to be." The teenager stepped closer. His friends laughed, pulling out their phones. "Nice hat, Grandpa. You fight in the Civil War, or something?" Harold's jaw tightened. "I served my country." "Served what? Coffee at the nursing home?" The teenager reached out and flicked the cap off Harold's head. It fell to the pavement, and the kid kicked it under a nearby car. "Oops." Harold stood frozen. The disrespect cut deeper than any physical pain. He'd survived Okinawa, watched friends die in mud and blood, carried their memories for 70 years. And now this kid treated him like garbage. "Pick that up," Harold said. His voice remained steady, but something shifted in his eyes. "Or what?" The teenager stepped even closer, his phone now recording. "You gonna beat me up, old-timer? You can barely walk." The other 2 teens circled around, their phones also out, capturing every moment for whatever social media platform would give them attention. Harold bent down slowly, painfully, trying to reach his cap under the car. His back screamed in protest. The teenagers laughed louder, one of them mimicking Harold's movements in an exaggerated display. Then the rumble started. It was distant at first, like thunder on the horizon. But it grew louder, deeper, unmistakable. The sound of 10 motorcycle engines approaching in formation. The lead motorcycle was massive, chrome gleaming even under the overcast sky. Behind it came 9 others, all Harley-Davidsons, all ridden by men who looked like they'd been carved from granite and wrapped in leather. They pulled into the parking lot with synchronized precision, engines roaring before falling silent one by one. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise had been. The teenager, who had knocked off Harold's cap, stopped laughing. His phone wavered in his hand. The riders dismounted. Each wore a leather vest with patches that identified them as Hell's Angels. The insignia was unmistakable, the reputation that came with it even more so. These weren't weekend warriors playing dress-up. These were men who lived by a code most people would never understand. The man who'd been riding lead walked forward. He was tall, probably 6'3", with a grey beard that reached his chest and arms covered in tattoos that told stories of their own. His name was Jack Ironside Morrison, though Harold didn't know that yet. Jack walked straight to the car where Harold's cap had landed. He knelt down, retrieved it, and brushed it off carefully. Then he turned to Harold, extending his hand with the cap. "Sir," Jack said simply. Harold took the cap, his hands trembling slightly now. He placed it back on his head and nodded his thanks. Jack turned to the teenagers. He didn't speak immediately, he just looked at them, and that look carried more weight than any threat could have. "You kids got something to say?" Jack's voice was calm, almost conversational. That somehow made it more intimidating. The teenager with the gelled hair had gone pale. His friends had already backed up several steps, but he was frozen in place, his phone still in his hand. We were just what?" Another rider stepped forward. This one was shorter but broader, with a scar running down his left cheek. His name was Marcus, and his eyes held no humor. "Just disrespecting a veteran? Just mocking a man who served while you stand there in your $200 sneakers?" "We didn't mean..." "You did mean it," Jack interrupted. "That's exactly what you meant. You saw an old man, someone you thought couldn't fight back, and you decided to make him your entertainment. The other angels had formed a loose semicircle now, not threatening but unmistakably present. Each of them watched the teenagers with expressions that ranged from disgust to barely controlled anger. Harold spoke up quietly. "It's all right, boys will be boys." "No sir," Jack said, not taking his eyes off the teenager. "Boys will be held accountable." Jack pulled out his own phone. The teenager's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Same thing you were doing," Jack said, documenting. "You wanted to put this online, right? Show all your friends how tough you are, mocking a 90-year-old veteran. Well, let's make sure we get the whole story." He started recording. "State your name." The teenager's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Your name," Jack repeated. His voice hadn't gotten louder, but the command in it was undeniable. "B. Blake. Blake Henderson." "And where do you go to school, Blake?" Blake's eyes darted to his friends, who were now completely backing away. "Lincoln High." "Lincoln High," Jack repeated. "And Blake, do you know what this man was doing when he was your age?" Blake shook his head. Marcus stepped forward, his scarred face inches from Blake's. He was storming beaches in the Pacific. He was watching his friends die. He was fighting so that entitled little punks, like you could here 70 years later and mock him. Harold raised a hand. "Gentlemen, please." "With respect, sir," Jack said, glancing at Harold. "This lesson is overdue." He looked back at Blake. "You know what we do, Blake? We ride across this country escorting funeral processions for veterans. We stand in the rain at military burials. We make sure the families of fallen soldiers know that someone remembers, someone cares." Another rider, a thin man with a ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. His voice was surprisingly soft. "I'm Eddie. My grandfather fought in Korea. He came home with half his face blown off and nightmares that never stopped. He died when I was 12, and kids like you made fun of his scars." Blake was crying now, not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that ran down his face as the reality of his actions finally penetrated whatever bubble of privilege and thoughtlessness had surrounded him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't tell us," Jack said, pointing at Harold. "Tell him." Blake turned to Harold, his legs visibly shaking. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Harold looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Blake stared at it, confused. Then he took it, and Harold's grip, weakened by age, still conveyed something the boy would never forget. "You made a mistake," Harold said quietly. "We all do. What matters is what you do next." A police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. The diner manager had apparently called them when she saw the confrontation developing. Officer Sarah Chen stepped out, her hand instinctively moving near her weapon when she saw the angels. But Jack raised both hands, open and non-threatening. "Officer, no trouble here. Just having a conversation." Sarah's eyes moved from the angels to the teenagers to Harold. She'd been a cop for 12 years and had developed good instincts. Something had happened here, but whatever it was seemed to be resolving itself. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Blake spoke up, his voice shaky but clear. "I was being disrespectful to this veteran, ma'am. These men, they helped me understand what I did wrong." Sarah's eyebrows rose. She looked at Jack, reassessing. "That's a first. We're not here to cause problems," Jack said, "just to make sure respect is shown where it's due." Harold cleared his throat. "Officer, these gentlemen have been nothing but courteous. I'd like to buy them breakfast if they'll allow me." The tension that had filled the parking lot began to dissipate. Sarah looked around once more, then nodded. "All right, but I'm going to need all of you to move this inside. You're blocking traffic." As everyone began moving toward the diner, Blake's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at Harold, then made a decision. He opened his social media app, found the video he'd started to, and deleted it. One of his friends, who had been watching from a distance, called out, "Dude, that would have gotten like 1 million views." Blake turned to him. "Yeah, and it would have made me look like exactly what I am. An idiot." Inside the diner, the waitress's eyes went wide when she saw the procession entering. 10 Hells Angels, 3 teenagers, 1 elderly veteran, and a police officer. It wasn't the usual Tuesday morning crowd. Jack organized the seating, making sure Harold had the most comfortable booth. The angels filled the surrounding tables, their leather vests and imposing presence, drawing stares from the handful of other patrons. Blake stood awkwardly near the entrance until Harold gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down, son. I don't deserve." "Sit." Blake sat. Officer Chen positioned herself at the counter, accepting a cup of coffee from the clearly nervous waitress. She kept one eye on the situation, ready to intervene if needed, but increasingly convinced she wouldn't have to. Harold didn't speak immediately. He looked at his hands, weathered and spotted, the hands that had once been young and strong enough to carry a rifle through hell. "My friends called me lucky," he said quietly. "I never felt lucky, but I survived when a lot of better men didn't." Blake listened, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Okinawa. Summer of 1945. I was 19 years old." Harold's eyes focused on something far beyond the diner walls. "We landed on the beach on April 1st. By the time it was over, 12,000 Americans were dead. More than that wounded. The Japanese fought for every inch." Jack leaned forward at his table, listening just as intently as Blake. "I watched my sergeant, a man named Williams from Texas, get cut down by machine gun fire trying to save a wounded private. I watched my best friend since basic training, Tommy Chen, step on a mine." Harold's voice never wavered, but something in his eyes showed the cost of these memories. "I held him while he died. He was 18, kept asking me to tell his mother he was sorry he wouldn't be coming home." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the cook had stopped moving. "So when you knocked off my cap," Harold said, looking directly at Blake, "you weren't just disrespecting me. You were disrespecting Tommy, and Williams, and all the men who never got to be 90 years old." Blake's face was wet with tears again. "I never thought. I didn't." "I know you didn't," Harold said. "That's the problem. Your generation, you've never seen war on your soil. Never watched your friends die. And that's good. That means we did our job. But it also means you forget." Marcus spoke up from his table. "My dad was Vietnam. Agent Orange got him when I was 25. He spent his last year in a VA hospital, lungs destroyed. But you know what? He never complained. Said he'd do it again if he had to." Another angel, a quiet man named Ray, added, "My uncle, Desert Storm, came home without his legs. Still coaches Little League. Still shows up to every game in his wheelchair. Never asks for help, unless he has to." One by one, the angels shared their connections to the military, their reasons for respecting the uniform, the flag, the sacrifice. Blake listened to all of it, his worldview cracking and reforming with each story. Officer Chen walked over to Harold's table. "Sir, I don't know if you remember, but my grandfather's name was Tommy Chen. He died on Okinawa." Harold looked up at her, his face going pale. "Tommy Chen from San Francisco? Loved baseball?" Sarah nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "He talked about you all the time, showed me pictures of his baby sister, said she was going to be somebody important." Harold's voice broke. "You look like him." The connection, spanning 70 years and generations, hung in the air of the diner like something sacred. Word of what was happening had spread. More people began arriving at the diner, drawn by the sight of the motorcycles and the police car. But instead of trouble, they found something unexpected. A middle-aged man in a business suit approached Harold's table. "Sir, I overheard your story. My grandfather was at Okinawa too. I never got to meet him. He died before I was born. Thank you for your service." Harold nodded, accepting the thanks with the quiet dignity he'd maintained for 9 decades. More people came. A teacher with her class on a field trip. A construction worker on his lunch break. A young mother with 2 children. Each of them came to shake Harold's hand, to thank him, to acknowledge what he'd done. Blake watched all of this, seeing the ripple effects of service and sacrifice, understanding for the first time that his actions had consequences beyond his small circle of friends and social media followers. Jack ordered breakfast for everyone, refusing to let Harold pay despite the old man's protests. The angels relaxed, sharing stories and jokes, becoming less intimidating and more human as the meal progressed. Blake's friends had slipped away at some point, but Blake stayed. He seemed unable to leave, as if he needed to absorb everything happening around him. Harold noticed. "You don't have to stay, son. No one's keeping you here." "I want to," Blake said. "If that's okay." "It's okay." They ate together. Harold told stories about his life after the war, how he'd come home and worked as a carpenter, built houses, raised 3 children. His wife had passed 5 years ago, he said. Cancer. He missed her every day. Blake told Harold about his life. Single mother, working 2 jobs. absent father, using attitude and bravado to cover up the fear that he'd never amount to anything. The stories were different, but the vulnerability was the same. My mom always talks about my grandfather, Blake said quietly. He was military too. Air Force. I never met him. He died before I was born. What was his name? Robert Henderson. She said he flew transport planes. One of the angels, an older man named Victor who had been quiet until now, looked up sharply. Robert Henderson, big guy, loved to tell jokes. Blake's eyes widened. Yeah, that sounds like him. From the pictures and stories, I mean. I knew him, Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. We served together in Germany. Early 70s. Good man, best friend I had for 3 years. He looked at Blake with new eyes. You're Bobby's grandson. The coincidence seemed impossible, but there it was. Blake, who had mocked a veteran in a parking lot, was the grandson of a man who had served with honor, a man these angels would have respected. The breakfast stretched into lunch. More people came and went, each stopping to acknowledge Harold, to share their own stories, to create a web of connection and memory that filled the small diner with something powerful. Blake's mother arrived, summoned by Officer Chen. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s, still wearing her work uniform from the grocery store. When she saw her son sitting with Harold and the angels, confusion and worry crossed her face. Blake stood up quickly. Mom. Mrs. Henderson? Victor stood up, and despite his intimidating appearance, his voice was gentle. Your father was Robert Henderson. She nodded slowly, not understanding. I served with him. He was a good man. A great man. Victor gestured to Blake. Your son made a mistake this morning, but he's learning from it. Bobby would be proud of that. Not of the mistake, but of the willingness to learn. Blake's mother looked at her son, then at Harold, then at the assembled angels. What happened? Harold spoke up. Your son showed disrespect to a veteran. These gentlemen helped him understand the gravity of that action. And now we're all just sharing a meal, and some stories. I'm so sorry, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I work so much I can't always watch him, and his father. No apologies needed, Jack said firmly. Blake here has taken responsibility. That's more than most adults do. Blake stood up and hugged his mother, something he apparently hadn't done in a while based on her surprised expression. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for being a jerk, for not appreciating what you do, for not understanding about Grandpa. The diner erupted in spontaneous applause. It wasn't loud or theatrical, just a gentle acknowledgement of growth and redemption. Officer Chen decided no report was necessary. The diner manager, who had been watching everything unfold, announced that lunch was on the house for everyone at Harold's table and the surrounding area. As the afternoon wore on and people began to leave, Blake asked Harold something unexpected. Could I maybe come visit you, sometimes? Hear more stories? Harold smiled, and it transformed his face. I'd like that very much. Jack wrote down Harold's phone number and gave Blake his own. You ever need anything, kid, you call me, and I mean anything. Someone giving you trouble at school, need help with homework, whatever. We take care of our own, and Bobby's grandson is our own. The angels prepared to leave, their motorcycles roaring to life one by one. But before they departed, each of them came to shake Harold's hand, to thank him for his service, to acknowledge the bond that connected them all. Blake stood with Harold as the angels rode away, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. The parking lot where the confrontation had started was now just a parking lot again, but everything had changed. What do I do now? Blake asked. Harold put a hand on the young man's shoulder. You live better. You remember. And when you are old like me, you tell these stories to some other kid who needs to hear them. Blake nodded, understanding for the first time that history wasn't something that happened to other people in books. It was alive, carried in the memories of people like Harold, passed down through moments like this. Officer Chen drove Harold home that afternoon, making sure he got inside safely. Blake and his mother followed in their car, at Harold's invitation. They spent hours looking at old photographs, medals, letters from the war. Blake posted something on social media that night. Not the video he'd planned. Instead, he posted a picture of Harold's Marine Corps cap, along with a long explanation of what had happened and what he'd learned. It went viral, but not in the way his original video would have. People shared it with respect, with their own stories of veterans in their families, with gratitude and understanding. The Hells Angels chapter started visiting Harold regularly. They'd arrive on Sunday mornings, 10 motorcycles pulling up to his small house, bringing groceries and stories and companionship. Blake came too, every Sunday, sometimes bringing friends who wanted to hear Harold's stories firsthand. 3 months later, Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 90 years and 4 months old. His funeral was packed. Veterans from every branch of service, townspeople, former students from the school Blake attended, and 10 Hells Angels in their leather vests, standing at attention. Blake spoke at the funeral. He talked about a parking lot, a moment of stupidity, and the grace of an old Marine who had taught him what honor really meant. The Angels escorted the funeral procession, their motorcycles flanking the hearse, making sure everyone knew that one of the good ones was passing through. And in the pocket of Blake's suit jacket was a worn Marine Corps cap, gifted to him by Harold's daughter. He would keep it for the rest of his life, a reminder that disrespect costs nothing in the moment, but everything in the end, and that sometimes, redemption comes from the most unexpected places. The lesson that started in a parking lot with mockery and ended in a diner with understanding had changed everyone it touched, because that's what real stories do. They don't just entertain, they transform. And Blake Henderson, who had once been a thoughtless teenager recording an old man's humiliation, became someone who spent the rest of his life ensuring that veterans were honored, remembered, and respected. All this 10 Hells Angels had been watching when he thought no one important was paying attention.